Good day, everyone. My name is Gail Rutkowski, and I am the former executive director of NASSTRAC. I tried retiring last year and it didn't work. So I came back. I just missed this industry too much. And I am really thrilled to be back here, especially this month. I want to thank our host today, TranzAct, for bringing you these two webinars during National Women's History Month. This year, our theme is celebrating women who tell our stories, and our panelists today will share some of those stories with us. These webinars will be featuring women in supply chain, as well as the general business community, who have devoted their lives and talents to improving the industry and encouraging and mentoring young women to enter our country. Although women have made progress, there are still areas where we face obstacles because of our gender. For example, women still earn less than men on average, and they carry the majority of the household and childcare responsibilities, face workplace stigmas and double standards, and are underrepresented in leadership, STEM careers, and politics. Today, we're going to be speaking with a group of accomplished women who overcame many challenges and obstacles to sit on top of their companies. They will share their stories with us and discuss opportunities that lay ahead for those who will follow them. We have a bunch of questions already teed up, but if you do have a specific question, please use the chat box to communicate with us, and we will do our best to get to your questions as we can. Now I'd like to introduce the panel and ask them to tell us just a little bit about themselves. And I'm going to start with Tami Allensworth, the Senior Vice President of Customer Experience for J.B. Hunt. Tami, get us started.
Sure. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. As Gail said, my name is Tami Allensworth. I am celebrating my 36th year with J.B. Hunt Transport. It's been an amazing career, and so I'm excited to spend the next hour and a half kind of getting to know these other ladies on the panel, but also sharing our stories that we have encountered along the way.
Excellent. Thank you, Tami. And next up, Christian Diaz, Vice President of Global Supply Chain for Mars Snacking.
Thank you. Thank you, Gail. Yes, Kristen Dias. I'm really excited to be here and share with all of you today and learn from some others. I've got a history as a supply chain professional in the consumer goods industry with different companies like P&G and Unilever, and took some time to leave industry and run a tech startup for about 5 years. That then went through a couple of acquisitions during the pandemic, and just 2 years ago now, returned back to Mars to run the global supply chain. It's been really interesting to go through a couple of different industry moves, so happy to share whatever perspectives along those journeys add value for any of you today, and really look forward to it.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. And Jean Regan, CEO of TranzAct Technologies.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jean Regan. I'm President and CEO of TranzAct Technologies. We offer an array of services to shippers. I've been here, I don't even want to give the number of years that I've been here. I started my career at KPMG, and currently I am on the board of a $23 billion property and casualty insurance company. I'm head of the audit committee, which is the first female who's been in charge of a committee there, which is, I'm very honored to do that. I'm also on the Dean's Business Council at University of Illinois and on the Business Advisory Council at Northwestern University. I'm also on the board of a not-for-profit up at Green Lake, Wisconsin, for those of you familiar with Central Wisconsin. I spent 9 years with KPMG. I'm happily married to Mike Regan, who's known as the 2-minute warning guy. I have 4 children. I'm very proud of them. I have 2 young grandsons who I love to death. And I am very passionate about golf.
Thanks, Jean. And then Kendra Tucker, CEO of Truckstop. Kendra.
Hi, good morning. I'm Kendra. I am the CEO of Truckstop, which is an integrated platform that helps small truckers find freight, or in other words, as our customers tell us, we are primarily a load board, but we do help them find goods to put in their trucks, and we help the people with the goods find those trucks. I joined Truckstop in 2020, so I'm relatively new in the supply chain space. My background is primarily in technology. So before I came to Truckstop, I was leading sales and customer functions at a restaurant software company. I was within the Vista private equity ecosystem, which focuses on enterprise software. And I spent the bulk of my career at a tech-enabled services business that got acquired by Gartner. So I bring the tech element to most of the conversations that I participate in. But of course, just given the types of jobs I've had, I am typically a minority in multiple ways, multiple fronts, and happy to share some of those experiences with you all today. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Kendra. That tech world always scares me anyway. But again, but it's another industry that really women are in the minority, and it's great to see more women get into that field as well. So why don't I stay with you and tell me a little bit about your first job and what was the landscape and culture when you began your career, and how has it changed today?
Yeah. So my first job was actually not in technology. It was working at the Gallup organization. So you guys know them for the Gallup poll. I was a consultant. And what I remember about joining, it was in the early 2000s. What I remember is that I was 21 and I had been given a job where I had to do public speaking every week. I think it was on the road, two or three cities a week. I recall being so young and having to present things like employee engagement survey results, or Gallup has this tool, which is fantastic, called the Strengths Finder. Presenting those assessment results back to really senior men in organizations was quite a challenge coming right out of school. But what I really remember about the experience was I don't recall thinking about myself as a woman in business so much as I was really acutely aware of being a young person in business, trying to make my way, like trying to gain credibility. And there's a lot of good lessons that come out of that early on in your career. I'll tell you where I really experienced, if it's okay to go this way, I'll tell you where I really experienced or started to acutely feel a cultural shift was actually at a different stage in my career, call it like 10 to 12 years ago. I think I'd moved into a middle management role. So I was leading a couple of sales teams. And what was very distinctive then was getting my voice heard in conversations, particularly in decision-making meetings, was difficult. I felt like I would say something, but people wouldn't hear me. And then someone else around the table would say something, and all of a sudden it would get heard. And so I developed this tactic that ended up being really successful for me. You can judge it. You can definitely give me feedback on what you think. It was successful, which was I would do a meeting before the meeting. So I would identify the people in the meeting who would have more social capital than I, or political capital than I would seek them out prior to the meeting, pitch them my idea, so that when I got to the decision-making meeting, I'd have another voice, like an echo behind me, to make sure that my voice was heard. It took a lot of work and preparation and had to borrow credibility. A lot of the people that I would seek out before, as you might imagine, were white males, which is what most of my work environments look like. But it really helped to get my opinions and ideas heard in a way that I wasn't able to do earlier on. So that's one of my experiences to share.
Credit, it also got you got some buy-in prior to going in, so you had some backup, which is also great.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Kristen, what about you?
Yes. My first job was as a controls and information systems engineer at P&G. So I was living and breathing, living in the factories when we were expanding sites, building new sites. And as you can imagine, just going through undergrad as an electrical engineering major was one of the few females at that point in time, early on. And so when I was in that first job, there were really no other female electrical engineers that I was finding myself in the factories. And so it was an interesting environment because I was deployed a lot. I would come back home and then I'd get on loan and I'd go live in a different site for 6 months to a year. And just, I think what I found was similar to what Kendra was saying. I had to do a lot to build out a support network of advocates outside of forums, so that if there were ideas that I had for how to approach something within a startup, people would hear what I had to say, or I would get that external support. Otherwise, it was easy to just kind of not be heard and buried, given the room of mostly men that would be at meetings that I found myself in. The other thing that I found too was just in that time frame, maybe it was more me individually, but it was hard for me to find my voice and want to even be vocal, being the only one in the room a lot of times. You could let others speak and then go focus on getting the work done. And that didn't help much. And so if I think about how things have changed now, I get really excited by looking at a lot of the even very intentional allyship that's been happening in organizations to say, if there's only one or two women in the room, seek them out for what isn't being said, because there is a strength and diversity of thought and different experiences that people add. So I'm also happy to say now I'm finding myself running into female factory directors, many other female electrical engineers that are in the sites as I move around our network. So it does seem like things have changed a bit, but it was hard back then to be kind of one of the only ones in the room and then have the courage to have your voice heard.
I think you and Kendra have different ways of approaching a problem, which is very cool. I know I encountered it as well. Tami, what about you? I know JB Hunt is full of women right now, but was it always that way when you started?
No, it was not, Jean. Gail, whenever I started, so 36 years ago, I came in entry level. And if I think back to who I got to look at as far as role models, there was really a couple. And one of the things that stood out to me is they were very strong women and felt they had to be very strong inside the supply chain, transportation. And so I remember sitting back and thinking, can I be that strong? Can I be that vocal? And I think over time was able to understand that I can be strong, but I don't have to be maybe rough. I can be strong and not necessarily have to be like the men that are in the room with me. And so definitely an evolution of my own that I went through. But again, when I started, very few women, as opposed to what I get to witness today, which is tremendous growth inside our own organization, and the ability to pull other women forward is something that I absolutely enjoy day in and day out, of just making sure that everybody has a place inside our organization to use their voice. And I would definitely say 36 years ago, that was probably not the case. I would say in the industry and then again inside our own organization. And so I do remember one time as a young mother being told, hey, your place is really probably more at home. And if your kids are sick, you need to have a backup plan because we need you in the office, versus what I would say today. Today, we have a really healthy work-life balance, and we have the ability to share home responsibility with our spouse and not feel like we have to be the one and only person when our children are sick or whatever might come up. So a definite transition, evolution that I love getting to witness for the next generations coming in.
That's great to hear. That's really good to hear. Jean, what about you?
So I started off my career at KPMG, and I was there for 9.5 years. I love the experience. I worked my way up from a staff accountant to a senior manager. And the things that happened there, I don't want to bash KPMG because they were emblematic of the whole basically public accounting industry at the time, but there were very few women. There were no women partners. And the premise was that work always came first. We had a busy season, January through March. We worked 6 to 7 days a week. I had a couple of out-of-town engagements, and during the busy season, I spent 2 weeks straight out of town. And you didn't think of taking a vacation or sick days during busy season. It just was the way it was. I remember I had the old travel bag, that bent over, and I would leave Sunday afternoon and I would work a full day Friday and come home Friday night. I wouldn't even unpack the bag. I would have my dry cleaning done while I was out of town. It was a different environment. I will say that today there's a respect for the work-life balance, and it's good to see, because as Gail, you mentioned, women bear the responsibilities for childcare, for really running the home and things like that. And I know at our company, you know, you want to take an afternoon off and go see your child at a play at school or whatever, go ahead and do it. We really relish people asking us to do that. So I would say the old adage was, did you live to work or did you work to live? And I think it's really changed from the 80s, and that there's a more balance in women's lives. There still is, I think, and you've mentioned it, that we need more women in leadership positions. I see it even in this board I'm on, of this insurance company. We've had 4 audit partners over the last years that I've been on the board. One's been a woman. So there's still room for us to grow and to mature, but I think it's changing, albeit slowly. So I encourage all of you, just stay with it. The change is coming, and we look forward to all your success.
That's great. Thank you, Jean. When you look around today, what issues are still troubling in terms of women's advancement? And Jean, you kind of hit on some of them, but anybody want to take a shot at that?
I'll jump in, Gail.
Okay.
You know, there's some things that I find fundamentally, I believe that you get what you measure. And one of the metrics that I look at is what is the diversity in the pipeline, succession pipeline for key leaders. And as I even look around within my own organization, I would say there's a lot of areas where having women represented in a succession pipeline can still be less than 20%. And we talk about wanting to hit 50% gender parity in these roles. If our pipelines are under 20%, there's no way that we're going to get there, you know, to parity. And so that is one thing for me. It's, you know, what can we do to really make sure that we are kind of leaning in with some talent to make sure that we're advocating for getting really good gender representation in succession pipelines. At the end of the day, we want the most qualified people to take roles, but if we look at a succession pipeline that has absolutely no gender diversity, we're doing something wrong. And it doesn't necessarily mean we don't have the talent. It means we may not be properly, intentionally advocating for and bringing the right talent forward to give them those opportunities.
For me, Gail, it's when I was a young mom, it's the childcare aspect. You have a child sick, you have they're off school certain days. And I just read an article and left the workforce because the cost of childcare equals what they make. I mean, we've got to resolve this issue, because if you take a woman out of the workplace for, let's say, 10 to 15 years, they fall behind in terms of, you know, their skills and their talents and experience. So to me, we've got to address the childcare issue. I always say good childcare, but we spent a lot for it. We have live-in care. So if I had a child sick, it didn't matter, I still went to work. But a lot of people can't afford that. So somehow we as a society have got to address it.
Yeah, I read that same article. It was disturbing. We're still struggling with that.
Yeah.
Tami, you wanted to?
Agree. Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying, Jean. This was also one for me that I struggle with. Childcare for sure, but even when you think about maternity and or parental leave, this is one where I feel like as organizations, we can help to equalize this a bit more. When you think about maternity leave or FMLA, which is typically accessed by women right after they have a baby, versus parental leave that companies can offer, which are available then to males, females, so moms and dads. I think that's really important. It's almost like the subtext of maternity leave, or having women being the only one that access FMLA when a child is born. The subtext there is that it is a woman's job to do it. And we can help set the expectation that actually no, parents, regardless of role should be quite involved when a new child enters our family. So that's one in particular where I feel like it's moved really slowly or not fast enough. And the expectation, the burden there is still felt by the mom.
And Kendra, I'll tell you the other thing, when I had my second and third child,
Mhm.
back to work after 4 weeks because I was in a position of leadership.
Yep.
And it was relentless, the phone calls that you were receiving. So you just threw up your hands and said, I might as well just go back to work.
Yeah.
It's not just the leave. It's, do you allow the mom to really have time away from the work environment?
Yeah.
And that's tough. Tami, I want to throw a little bit of a curve on this question. There are some voices out there that really, in my opinion, are sending the exact opposite message of what you guys are echoing, that we do need more help with childcare. We do need to encourage family leave, not just for women, but for men as well. How does JB Hunt handle those issues, and how was it for you when you were having your children?
Yeah, I would agree with Jean in that, and I, to be perfectly honest, I feel like some of it is probably thrown on from my own desires, my own belief of what I need to be doing. So I absolutely did take my maternity leave, but felt the need to come back really, really quickly. Even though the organization was like, we've got it covered, but I think our wiring is that we need to jump back in as well. So as far as men at JB Hunt, we have rolled out parental leave, which is something fairly new to our organization. So really understanding that both parents are needed those first few weeks of a newborn coming into their family, their lives. And so really embracing that, which again, I think if I think back to the start of my career, was not something I would have thought we would entertain. And it just, in my mind, is one more example of the evolution that we have made as a society and as an organization, and transportation as well. So I do want to pop back to the question that you asked earlier. I agree with everything everybody said on here, but I do think that we still, we have to continue to coach our women into making sure that they're stepping forward and that they're coming to the table to say, I want to take advancement. I want to move up inside my organization. I find myself where I still have to convince people, no, you are ready. Like, you are the perfect person for this role. I think as women, we tend to think we need all 10 of the qualifications, and the fact is you probably don't. You need probably 8, and you're going to pick the other 2 up as you step into that role. So I think as women, we have to continue to remove that belief from our minds and the next generations coming up to say, no, take a seat at the table, put yourself out there. You absolutely can do the job, and step forward.
Tami, I read a similar article. I think it was the same time I was reading the one that Jean and I read about childcare, that women need to have all 10 things, requirements before they'll even apply. Men will go at 6. which I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It really is irrelevant, but they're willing to put it out there and take that risk. And women tend to be less risk adverse. And I think we also have an issue of speaking up for ourselves. And that's another challenge. I think a lot of women are learning, be quiet, sit in the corner, do your nice girl thing. And I think that causes some issues as well. Let's pivot a little bit. And and Tami, we'll stay with you. What is the one piece of advice you were given during your career that you would want to share with others?
Yeah, probably 2. One, it's okay to make a mistake. Again, I think as females, we feel like we have to be perfect. And boy, how liberating when I could remove that off of my shoulder to understand it's okay to make a mistake. It helps you learn and helps you step forward. So that'd be the first thing that I would say. And then honestly, I kind of mentioned it already. I wish I had taken a seat at the table earlier. But again, I felt like I needed to have not the 10 qualifications. I needed to have the 10 plus the 2 others that nobody was asking about in the event they wanted me to, step into that. So for me, it's take a seat at the table, put yourself out there. It's okay. So just put yourself out there. I wish I had known that earlier in my career.
It's great advice. Who's got one? Jean, you want to go next?
Sure. I think good advice I got was that early on, a mentor of mine at KPMG recognized I had a type A personality, which I think all of us here today have.
Mhm.
He said, you know, Jean, you want to solve the problems quickly, you want to solve them easily. And he basically said, don't do that. You know, allow the process to work and allow the information to bubble up. And, you know, even at TranzAct, I've had situations where someone's come to me and said, blah, 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 blah. And it's like you jump to a conclusion. It's like, oh my gosh, I have to go in, I have to fix this problem. And if you just took the time to resonate and look at it and obtain all the details, you'd realize it isn't really this problem, it's something else. So he basically gave me the advice to, again, step back, take a look at it. And I have a quote on my desk. It says, Mark Twain said, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And I have it on my desk. But anyways, the second thing he said is delegate. And I think as type A people, again, we want to go in, we want to solve the problem. And we have to, and I think you mentioned it, Tami, you have to delegate and let people fail. And when they fail, they really learn and they grow. So I would say it's delegate. And one thing I'm probably weak on is leaders. I think we understand our strengths and our weaknesses, and that's saying thank you and recognizing people for their accomplishments. We have a celebration, a TranzAct celebration every month, and we have formal thank yous and we read them off to the entire company so people are recognized, and then we pull the name out of a hat and you get a gift certificate. But it's a reminder that we need to say thank you more often. And the last thing I learned is to be authentic. And so, again, I have my strengths, I have my weaknesses. Who you see is who you get. And I think we should not try to be people that we're not. Someone mentioned the 10 leadership skills and you triggered 8 of them, but not the 2. Oh, admit it. Okay, these are the 2 areas I need to work on.
And surround your people that have those 2 that help you as well.
Right.
Jean, you reminded me of years ago, and I mean, when I first started my career, I was a secretary and I had a big group of guys that I worked for, and my boss would pass around articles from the Harvard Business Review. And back then you had to copy them all. Nobody just, scanned them. And the one I still have in it is brown with age and withered and ripped. It's Who's Got the Monkey? And I don't know if you ever read this article, Getting the Monkey on. Jean, I thought you, of all people, you might remember that one. And it's people come in your office with a problem, and instead of sending them out and get something, and you alluded to it in your advice, you take the monkey on your back, and then you wonder why you're so busy and why you can't get anything done. And that was a great, and you alluded to it as well. It still sticks with me. And I just recently gave it to a consulting client who's CEO of a company who is just driving himself crazy because he can't let go and he takes on everybody's problems. So it's endemic for everyone, not just women. But okay, who hasn't given me their, Kristen, how about you?
Yeah, I'll share. I think lots of, there was a lot that was shared already that really resonated with me. One thing additive that I'll share is, one of the things I learned is how important it is to know who you're being and how that impacts those around you. And I was telling this story recently, in a former life, working in a different environment. I found myself in an environment that was very much command and control. And I was one of the few women leaders in that organization. And I was constantly being told, don't show your emotion. You're in charge, be tougher, and, lead from the front of the room. Don't come in the back door. It was all about, this is what I was constantly hearing. And, to a certain extent, you want, I think I started trying to play the part, right? And I love what was shared about being authentic, because what I learned through that experience was it's a heck of a lot more energy to be somebody that you're not. It's exhausting. It has a mental and a physical impact on you. And not only you personally, what I found in that experience was there were a lot of hard times in that journey, and I needed to bring people along. And I hadn't really been taking a step back to say, who was I being and how was that impacting those around me when I was not being authentically me? And I remember at one point, I just let it out, and I was sharing in a forum with other women leaders. I had young kids, I was traveling all the time, things can be frustrating. And it was meant to be kind of like a rallying cry around, let's get through this. The end is, we see the light at the end of the tunnel, keep pushing yourself. And at the end of that forum, people got a lot more engaged, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, you're human, you're not a robot. And what that told me was I was playing the part of trying to be who somebody wanted me to be, and it wasn't me. And I wasn't being human. I wasn't being authentic. And it was creating an environment around me for my teams that couldn't be who they were. So I think for me, really, it is just knowing who are you being at any one point in time, and how is that impacting those around you? That was one thing that really, really sticks with me to this day.
Great. And Kendra,
Yeah,
what about you?
I think this is all great advice. I think from my experience, I would add good advice I've gotten is and used has been to find a sponsor. Meaning, and I don't know if you guys know the difference or how one defines a sponsor versus a mentor, but this was part of my own education. When this person said this to me, I'm like, what's a sponsor? And the difference is a mentor is someone who can certainly be a guide and a sounding board, someone who you can bounce ideas off of. A sponsor is someone who's willing to spend their own political capital on you in advancement, hopefully, of your own career or goals. And that was really good advice. The advice went even further, which is that sponsor doesn't need to look like you. That's particularly helpful. I think someone mentioned allyship, and it's almost like sponsorship is the personalized version of allyship, which is you don't have to look like me or had my experiences, but you believe in me and what I'm capable of. And I've had that, I think, at a number of points in my career, and it's just I wouldn't have been as successful had I not had that kind of support. I made at one point in my career, I'd actually started out, like I told you, I was at the Gallup organization first. And then when I switched to the tech-enabled services company, I was actually building product and content for that business. At one point, I switched completely over to sales and I stepped into a sales manager role. To do that cutover was one, not something that people usually did. And two, I absolutely could not do that on my own. And so the first real sponsor I had, there were two probably in a span of 2 or 3 years, but was the man who recruited me into the sales manager role. He was one of the senior sales leaders, and he really took me under his wing, and he taught me so much and helped me be so successful. And then the second was our chief commercial officer, who truly invested in me, just spent money on me and my development, and I guess just what they put forth, right, in order to help me be successful was truly different. And I am more successful as a result of it. So that's my advice to other women is seek it out and cultivate it.
Thanks. Kendra, I'm going to stay with you. How has your current position allowed you to grow and to help other women grow along with you?
Yeah. So I was thinking about the composition of my leadership team, and over 50% of my leadership team at Truckstop are female, some of whom I've brought along with me from previous roles. I will tell you, in all honesty, when I think about bringing in good talent, I'm not often thinking about it in terms of gender or race or any of that. Generally speaking, my network has remained fairly diverse. But as I build out leadership teams and put people into positions where they are leading and advising others, I'm drawing from those networks that I've built in the past. And it usually means that the people I've worked with before are coming along with me on the journey. So I can see it reflected, I think, in the composition of the teams that I have.
That is excellent. As I was listening to you, I was thinking back to my own career where I've had mentors and sponsors, and actually they did what you did with your team. You have a group of people you work with and you know you're successful. And I followed them from one job to another job. And and they're like, okay, now you're going to leave LA and move to Memphis because we need you over here. But it's great because you've got this trusted circle that of folks that you know each other, you can work together and you bring them along. So it's great to hear women. I've only had men do that for me. It's nice to hear that women now have those networks and that are able to do that as well. Kristen, what about you?
Absolutely. I was thinking through this a little bit, in terms of how my current position has allowed me to grow. And then, the effect that has on other women. I think for a part of it, in my journey on being a more effective leader, I think one of the things I've done is just share my stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. What are the hard learnings that I wish I knew earlier? And sharing that and being vocal about that. And I think in some cases it gives other women, maybe early in their career, the courage to find their voice and get there faster than maybe I did in my experiences. The other thing I found that I do is in terms of helping other people grow, when you think about push-pull in the operational world, I think I very intentionally pull women up. And we have the opportunity to do that in some of the roles that we're in. Somebody mentioned it earlier, a lot of times a woman will want to tick every box before they say they're qualified for something. Leaning in and pulling them and encouraging them to come in and really lean in and take some risks or some chances on themselves when you know that they can do it. And sometimes that's all some people need is that word of confidence, in their ear to go for it. And then the other thing that I was thinking about is back to kind of succession pipelines. One thing I do is I say that I'm not okay with any talent development panel going forward with an open role unless there's some sort of diversity in that pipeline. It doesn't mean that you have to hire a diverse candidate, but giving an equal opportunity, and it's more really checking for unconscious bias in the organization. Are we not recognizing a hidden talent that may be well qualified, to lean in for some sort of a development opportunity for those that are maybe more obvious or maybe more vocal or with a louder voice? Really being very intentional on making sure from a talent pipeline, talent panel side, I'm doing everything I can to at least provide the platform for somebody to, have the opportunity to explore the possibility of a new experience.
Great, thank you. Tami, what about you?
Sure. So if I think back to one of the roles that I took, which was helping start up our brokerage division, really lit the fire for me around talent development, career progression, building all of that out. We really started up a company inside a company. And so having to build everything as it relates to how we hire, how we recruit, again, their career path, allowed me to get a bug for doing research around starting our first ERG, our employee resource group. And so I get the privilege of being one of the co-founders and sit as the president of that group today. And it's GROW, which stands for Growing and Retaining Outstanding Women. And it really has allowed me to pour into women across our entire organization that I might not have come into contact from the role that I do day in and day out. Right now, we have a membership of about 1,600, which makes my heart really, really happy. We've been the original, that now 5 other ERGs have been created inside our organization. And so inside GROW, it's allowed us to mentor. We talked about mentoring, sponsoring. All of that is extremely important, but getting to see the hours that women are putting in to develop themselves, to me, just makes my heart so happy thinking back to starting it and watching it evolve over the years. I try to tell people all the time, as it relates to our ERG, not all women want to be sitting in an office. ERGs can be development for you personally. And so you're going to get out of an ERG what you put into an ERG. But again, for me, being one of the original to kick it off, to watch it over the years, to watch women progress in their career, and for them to come back and say, you know what, it was this networking event, or it was this professional development that I got because I was part of Grow, really helped them move in their career or their personal life, whichever element that they were looking for something for, I think is the benefit of an ERG. So for me, my current role, one thing, absolutely get to pour in, I do a lot of group mentoring, a lot of just sitting down. And one of the things I didn't say earlier that I thought, man, I wish I would have known this earlier. Our words, as you move up in your career, they're so important. So use them wisely. And I've had to share that over the years. It just, they have weight. Our words have weight. And so people react and move based on what comes out of our mouths. And so just making sure that we're very intentional around that. But again, for me, ERGs, near and dear to my heart.
That is great advice for someone who doesn't always have an editing process. I need to remember that. Jean, what about you?
I'm going to take a little bit of a different tact. When I was younger, and I only had 2 girls at the time, and we moved to a western suburb and a cul-de-sac street that was 22 houses, and only 2 women, I was one of them, worked on the street. And so my daughters got to see that, okay, mom left every morning, she went to work, she came back at night, and there were a plethora of other mothers who were there during the day, that picked their kids up from school, walked them to school, and so forth. And I got a lot of kind of, criticism from my oldest daughter about it. And I'll tell you, it came 360 when she became an adult, was working a couple of years, and said, Mom, I get it. I understand why you worked, and I will always work, no matter if I have children or not. So that was a positive reinforcement for me that what I was modeling for my daughters, they basically saw and said, okay, this is something that we want to emulate in the future. At TranzAct, what I try to do with all our leaders, whether they're male or female, I try to explain the decisions. We just worked on a reorganization, and it was probably a little longer than people wanted. But I tried to explain, okay, these are the reasons why we're taking the time and making sure that we get it right. And interestingly enough, in terms of personally mentoring, I have mentored 2 young men, one in the real estate industry, one who ultimately took a job with Young Presidents Organization. So that was encouraging to me that they reached out to me, saw that I had the skills and the abilities and could really help them in terms of furthering their careers.
That is a great point, Jean. I too have seen some young men that have worked for me that they kind of become your babies, and you just sort of help them along, which is a great thing. I think it's also interesting when you mentioned your daughters kind of growing up with a mom that worked out of the home. I've had young men work for me, and I'm really impressed by the fact that their moms work too. So I didn't have to overcome that initial hurdle as I did earlier in my career, trying to get men to accept a woman in a leadership role. These kids grew up with moms that were working anyway, and so they automatically just assumed it wasn't an issue, which is, I think, kind of cool as well. Speaking of that, what do you see in the differences of how women manage versus men, or if there are differences, and what are they? I'll throw that one open. Who wants to take it first? Don't be shy.
I can take it.
Okay.
So I think that it's just like, so I have 4 children. I parented those children differently based on their personalities. And I think you have to look at the personalities of the people that you're leading. And some people, boy, you got to crack them over the head to get them to understand something. And others, if you say one word that's any criticism, they shrink back and tears almost come to their eyes. So I think you really have to understand who you're dealing with. We've done personality tests. In fact, I'll never forget, we brought in a resource that it was birds, it was an eagle, it was an owl, it was a parrot. And it was interesting because what people thought they were and what they truly were, based on the personality test, was different. And we were in a room together and we recognized what our personality types were. And we went through how we would communicate with each other based on the types of personalities that we have. So I would encourage organizations whenever possible. I don't care what you use. There's Myers-Briggs, there's the DISC. We use this bird thing. In fact, I have on my desk, I'm still, I can pull it out. So I'm still an eagle. So, but because it helps you understand the differences in personalities and how you lead people and how you communicate with them.
And that's regardless of gender. It's.
Absolutely. Gender is unimportant.
Did you find when you did that study, Jean, that did men seem to flock under one particular bird and women, or was it pretty much dispersed?
No, it was surprising that we were pretty diverse in terms of the way that, let's say there's supposed to be so many of this personality, so many of this. We basically conformed to what the general pattern was.
Interesting. One of the things, and I'd like you to consider this, you guys going forward. In my first management position, I got the job over a young man who really wanted it, and about 2 years later, he got promoted as well. And we were doing an exit interview, and the one thing he said to me was, "I really didn't want to come work for you. I didn't think you could handle the job." I was 26, and I probably couldn't anyway. I was scared to death, but I was too young to be scared. But anyway, the upshot of the conversation was, he said, "I finally realized that you and I will approach a problem differently, but we'll come to the same conclusion." And he said, "I will look at the numbers. I'll look at the spreadsheet first. You look at people first." And I don't know if that was endemic of just me or all women, but I think women tend to approach it more from a human side of it. Not that you don't consider numbers or you don't look at it, but how do you guys feel about that? And do you think that that is a difference, or are there other differences that you've encountered?
I don't know. I land with Jean on this one, which is, it reminds me more of having kids. Then at least it's hard for me to see the gender stereotypes or commonalities pop out, because I'll tell you, when I think about that leadership team that I just described, right, where we're more than 50% female, there's a lot of female leaders on that team that start with the hard facts first and come to the people later. In fact, one of the things we joke about is we use the Myers-Briggs, and actually a place that I really need to focus on in terms of diversity hiring is there's a thinking type versus the feelings preference type. Oh man, we have too many T's. Feelers. and so you would think that women would show up more with the F, I guess, right? That might be a stereotype that women could live up to, but that is so not the case. And actually, there are a couple of men who bring the feelings point of view or the more emotional experience point of view to the conversations. And so I really struggle to see, I feel like maybe, it's different perhaps in the tech space, but I really struggle to get people to live up to the stereotypes. They're constantly breaking them.
And I think that that's evolved as well. I mean, my experience was 30 years ago, and obviously things changed for the best, I think, for the better. Yeah. Thanks, Kendra.
I think I've changed over time. If I think about myself, I probably was more Philly at the front, but now have moved more to the facts and then pull the Phil part in after the facts. But I think so. I would just speak for myself in that it's been an evolution over time.
Mm-hmm. Kristen?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. At first, when you asked that, I thought, gosh, I don't think I approached with any differences. But then I started thinking through how I'm engaging with my leadership team, and there are men and women on the team. And it struck me as I was kind of thinking through this with, and there are some, and again, these are generalizations and everybody's different. But I think what I found is when I'm interacting with the men leaders on my team, they do come a lot with facts and updates on how the business is going. And I find that I'm spending a lot more time asking them about their team and where there are maybe coaching or development opportunities to further set the team up for success. Whereas I think when I reflect on how those conversations emerge when I'm talking with women leaders on my team, a lot of times the focus they bring out is more on how they could be more effective as a person. And so it's almost like I hear from them, they don't want to overstep, and I'm almost pushing them to look at being more courageous in leading and strategically influencing. And so, you know, I don't know. I mean, again, it's generalities, but I would say I have found sometimes in managing men, it is maybe a little bit more intentionality around how to put people in and effectively coach, you know, and develop their organizations, you know, where with the women, it's maybe a little bit more of that pushing on their own to build their confidence and know that they can do more and they have a right to assert themselves more because they have a lot to offer in a different way.
That's great. I want to thank you, ladies. You've really teed up my last question for you. So thank you for that. In my readings recently, in a recent study by IPSOS UK and the Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College, some 52% of Gen Z and 53% of millennials say society has gone so far in promoting women's rights that it is discriminating against men. It makes me think that equality in the workplace is more than a woman's issue. Jean, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, we had talked about it before, and I still feel that there are barriers to women. And I mentioned I'm an avid golfer, and I want to bring this up because it's really a sore spot for me. So I belong to a club in the western suburbs. And when we first joined, there were restrictions on women playing on the weekends. You couldn't play until after 11 o'clock. You actually couldn't play at all on Wednesdays. And there was a men's grill. And I thought to myself, okay, this will change because this is a generation above me. This is my dad's generation. When my generation of men becomes, in governance of the country, it'll change. Well, guess what? It's 2023. It hasn't changed. There's no recognition of women working, so we should be able to play early on the weekends. There's still a men's grill. Wednesdays, we get to play a certain portion of the day. So, it's a survey, and I still think that we can find areas that there's still, I think, discrimination against women. And I think as a society, we just have to work together and basically take a look at all the pillars and say, okay, how do we address this one? This is business, this is government, this is not for profits. And I think there's work to be done still. I don't buy that it's gone in one end or the other end. I think it's better, but I look at like California put in a law, they might have rescinded it where you'd have so many females as board members and corporations. And, that's not the way to go about it. It still is, to me, on your abilities and your experience and so forth. But again, I still think there's a lot of work to be done in this area. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're female. It doesn't matter what your race is, your preferences, whatever. There's work to be done.
Okay. Tami?
Yeah, I don't know that I would add much more than what Jean said. I think we've made movement, but there's still work to be done.
Okay. This is encouraging for me anyway. I kind of feel the same way. Kristen?
Yes, I think the maybe a build on that I would have is I think that inviting a conversation that helps drive improvement for women actually can lead to affecting positive change for everyone. And so I found even as we, somebody was mentioning earlier about the employee resource groups, as I reflect on what we're building here, very intentionally, we have resourcing groups for women, but we intentionally invite allies to come be a part of each one of those forums. And we've heard a lot of positive feedback from some of the men that have been part of those and saying, I can be who I am. I'm finding courage to find my own voice when maybe they're feeling like they're playing a part, right? And not able to show their true self. So while I do believe that there's a lot more work to be done, I feel like in opening the conversation to invite allies along with us will continue to make it better for women, but also can affect a broader impact on positive change for a broader audience as well.
Thank you. And Kendra?
Yeah, I totally agree, Kristen. I was thinking the same thing, which is, Gail, when you read that stat that says, it basically makes it sound like, you know, we're over focusing on specific groups. I'll tell you more and more, I think I hear that theme is feedback within my own company and even outside, which is with the rise of diversity and inclusion and the rise of ERGs and just, I think how vocal we've become as organizations, as a society about it, there has also then been a rise, it seems to me, I'm speaking from pure opinion, no facts or studies really to back me up, but my sense is there is a growing feeling of an us versus them, which is the opposite of what we are going for. And I feel it's almost like, I think about it as almost like people feel like we have to achieve quotas in how many women we hire, how many people of a certain race we hire, and that's working against us versus taking the more inclusionary or inclusive view that Kristen was talking about, which is diversity is important because it'll help all of us as organizations be more successful, but the inclusive culture that we build where people truly feel like they belong, that they're part of a tribe, that's actually even more important. And so I'd like to figure out how you balance the two things, which is it is important to know that we are women or other parts of our identity, but not to exclude others, right? But rather to bring us together. So I think that's a balance, I guess, that we're working on.
And I think that's an interesting perspective, Kendra, as well, because I think just culturally or as a society, I thought it was just the US, but it seems since this report came from England, it's more global, that we tend to overcorrect as culturally. We have to go all the way to the right before we can come back to the center, or all the way to the left before we come back. So we see these extremes that I think we're feeling now in our country, but I think we're struggling with finding center right now. So hopefully that'll happen soon. We do have a question that came from the audience, and I'm curious about each of your thoughts about aging and how to navigate inside an organization relating to throwing your name in the hat for promotions. As a young-minded and ambitious senior employee, 63 years old, I do want to work for years to come and have a robust background. How do you feel organizations view older women employees today? Anybody want to take a stab at that one? Jean, I'll let you guess who asked the question.
Yeah, I can guess. I think age is just some sort of random number in your mind. And because we've all seen people who are older and are still energetic, are still youthful, still productive, still entertaining to be with. And then you see people who are younger who are like, okay, they've kind of given up on life and they don't really have much to offer. So I see more and more people working beyond age 65 and can still be productive. And, as long as you're healthy and energetic and you still have something to offer, I basically welcome it. And I think it's a good thing to come. I don't want to retire into La La Land. It has no, it's just not something that I attain to do. I don't want to go retire in Florida and play golf all day and tennis and, go to your country club at night and have dinner. That holds no allure for me. So I think that as long as we want to learn and we're seeking new experiences, seeking to learn, I think that, like I said, age is just a number in your mind.
That's great advice. Anybody else?
Well, I'll share, maybe it's a bit of a different point on the question, but so there was a very talented woman that I wanted to woo away from another company to come work with me. And I convinced her to take the early retirement package and come work. So she took the package, she took some time off, and then she decided she didn't want to come back to work full time. And I thought, oh my goodness, the whole plan was you were going to come join us. And so it's a bit of a flip on the question, but I think what it made me realize as well is, age is just a number. And some people, have the energy and the drive and the willingness to give and full time, in roles, and that needs to be a possibility. Others may not, and they may not want to be 100% in, but they don't want to retire yet. And so when I engaged in this conversation with this woman, I was like, what do you want? She was like, I don't want to work full time, but I want to do something, and so it's really pushed my thinking in a different way around how do we bring the gig economy to life, and look at a plethora of, difference in terms of thinking about a full-time role, but what are the experiences that people want to have and what can they give an organization through those experiences, and really letting that drive a bit about what that future is and how it might unfold for opportunities for people in an organization.
That's great. And a great point, Kendra. I need to thank TranzAct for giving me that opportunity as I decided to unretire. Mike kind of allows me to do things that I love to do and that I enjoy to do, and keeps me engaged in the industry. And I didn't want to work full time either. So it's exactly the right balance. So great comment. Thank you. Tami or Kendra?
I was just going to say, just like we talked a little bit about if you're entering into the workforce or you're young in your career, put yourself out there. I would say the exact same thing. Constantly be putting yourself out there. 63 doesn't matter. Step forward and say, I have the qualifications. I'm interested. Put me in.
There you go.
I agree. I think the ladies on the panel have said it really well. I think we all agree. Age is nothing but a number.
I did an entire career change at 62 when I left transportation and went to run NASSTRAC, and it was like a whole different job and a whole different level of skill sets, and I was scared as well. But I think when you get older, you're more willing to take risks, because I'm like, okay, so if it goes wrong, it goes wrong, at least I can say I tried. So I really appreciate that.
Gail,
yeah, go ahead.
I want to follow up on Kristen's comment too, because I don't think that the part-time work, where they're still engaged and they can be productive, we probably need to apply that to working moms too. How do we make that a win-win for them, that they, can still support their kids, but boy, they've got something to contribute to your organization, and you just have to find a role that isn't, 40 plus hours a week.
Exactly. And one more question. What do you find the best way for you to balance and find time for the need to continue to learn and train and grow, while at the same time maintaining energy and buoyancy, authenticity, and gratitude? That's a big question.
That's a loaded question, but I'll jump in and I'll share first, because I'll share one thing that I do very intentionally. There is a cross-industry peer forum that I'm a part of, which is never more than 30 people coming together. And very intentionally, we meet in person twice a year. A little bit of a gap with the pandemic, but now we're back in business and meeting live again. And it's fresh on my mind because we did it just this last week. And I think what I found was there are always things that will come up. There's always crises that can be an excuse to postpone something. But I protect those windows for those forums like you've never seen, nothing will eat into those. And they're just 18-hour diversions. It's 18-hour diversions twice a year. But I found, getting out of my environment for that external in kind of perspective, building a trusted relationship with like-minded peers, and having a little bit of fun along the way. Kind of, you got to find what gives you energy. I'm an introvert. I have to engage a lot with other people, but it drains my energy. And so these kinds of forums for me, it drains my energy, but it also gives me energy, because it's that almost like that replenishment of that camaraderie and that ideation and sharing, and we're all in it together, and we can challenge each other in the context of what we've known to be true. So for me, it's really carving out those kind of time set aside with that external perspective to recharge, get some fresh ideas, maybe have a peer set that's willing to put the mirror in front of me sometimes when people inside aren't willing to do that, to be able to take a step back and figure out how to continue to grow and be more effective.
Great.
Yeah, I can share next. So I have two thoughts. I was listening to the question as like almost a work-life balance question, but energy attached to it. I think my first thought on it is we can be pretty hard on ourselves in terms of how we measure quote unquote balance. And for me, what's worked well is to zoom out when I think about measuring balance. That work-life balance or integration, whatever you want to call it, it isn't achieved in a day or even a week, but rather I think of it as phases of time where I might be really invested in dedicating a ton of time to a work project for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, something, right? Where it's a meaningful amount of time. And for me, the balance comes where I can pull back on that and then refocus on something that is not work related for as intensely for another period of time. And so when I zoom out and look at it, the balance I can see happening in phases across my life, as opposed to day by day or week by week, which I would fail that test constantly. And then the second piece, just to keep my sanity, because I did read the energy portion of what the person has asked, is establishing super hard boundaries. I heard, Kristen, you kind of were describing this too when you talked about it as like an 18-hour diversion. On a daily basis, what I do manage is when I start work, when I stop work. I have a 3-year-old son, and it is really important for me to spend time with him when he's 3, because he's super cute. And as he gets older, he's going to be less cute. I already know that. And so I really want to enjoy those times with him right now. And so I carve out, people at work know this, from 7:30 to 9 a.m. every single day. That's my son's time. Like, if I'm not taking calls and you're not texting me or whatever's happening, I'm with my son during that time. And I really protect that hard because that matters to me. It removes mom guilt for the rest of the day. And it gives me energy that I need to do the hard work that I do. So anyway, those are my 2 tactics, is the zoom out and then the super hard boundaries.
I was just gonna, to build on that and say, I think that's something really great that you do, Kendra, because I think being vocal and sharing that boundary gives other women the courage to establish those boundaries and do the same thing themselves.
Great point.
Yeah, I remember a book I read years ago, and it talked about margin and how we schedule our lives, from the minute we get up to the minute we go to bed, and we're all scheduled out, and then a crisis occurs. And we have no margin to deal with that crisis. It could be a couple of years ago, it was when my dad became really sick, and I was going back and forth to Wisconsin to take care of him. And you have to build margin into your life to allow for those unexpected things that are going to occur in your life to happen. And I think, Kendra, to your point about energy, what gives you energy? For me, in the morning, I get a cup of coffee and I read my Bible. And I'll tell you, it really sets the stage for my day. I start out peaceful, I start out centered, and it gives me energy. So I think everyone has to find out what it is. I know for some people it's exercise. I can tell you, my husband is walking the dog. But whatever it is that starts your day off on the right foot, I would encourage you to take on those practices.
Tami, any closing comments for us?
No, they hit it.
Okay.
The only thing I might say is delegate. Really craft that technique of delegating. I wish I would have known that earlier in my career, but once you've mastered that, or you understand the importance of that, back to the monkey who's got the monkey, make sure all the monkeys aren't on your back. But that will help you be able to maneuver.
I can't believe after all these years that article still holds up. And I think it's not just delegating, it's once you delegate, as long as they get to the end result, don't try and micromanage how they get there. I have been guilty of that early in my career. Well, you didn't do it the way I wanted you to do it. And I'm a little OCD, so generally the way I want to do it is not the way other people would. But it's not just delegating, it's letting it go and giving them the power to, empowering them to do the job as well. Okay. Well, listen, you guys have been fabulous. I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of, I know your busy schedules, to join us. And I'm sure our attendees enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and I took some notes. There's stuff I still need to learn, but I want to thank you so much. And I want to invite all of you join us on the follow-up webinar next Tuesday, March 28th, as we close out Women's History Month by talking to another great panel of women. These folks are on their way up the ladder, and they will share their experiences and stories with us as well. You do need to register for that webinar to receive that recording, so it's a separate registration. But again, panelists, thank you so very much. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed the time we spent together today. And I wish everybody a good day. Thank you all.
So much.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you, Gail.